There's a lot of advice out there about when a startup should hire its first sales leader, which is why I wanted Eyal Worthalter to join us on this episode. Eyal is a multi-time sales leader at cyber startups and wrote an article titled Why Your First VP of Sales Hire Will Fail and What You Can Do Instead. In the article, he gave really solid recommendations that I agree with, and we had a couple of areas where we didn't have exactly the same viewpoint. Either way, he clearly has the experience to be able to give great advice. So this is an important discussion. I'm Andrew Monaghan, and this is the Cybersecurity Go-to-Market podcast, where we tackle the question, how can cybersecurity companies grow sales faster? Hey, Al, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for the 2 or 3 weeks that we've been going back and forward on it and talking about it. Interesting conversation that I think is going to happen from our discussion today.
I hope so.
It is all based on an article that you wrote for Ross Halleluck's Venture and Security blog, I guess it is. And then it was reposted or posted on LinkedIn, and it was titled, Why Your First VP of Sales Hire Will Fail and What You Can Do Instead.
Yes.
Provocative title.
I have to. If you don't make it provocative, then people will not read it, especially when it's that long. Ross and I debated over the title, and we settled on that one. But at the core, the idea is, there's been a lot of mistakes hiring VPs of sales, both from founders, even sales leaders that go into jobs thinking or having certain expectations, and then find the reality very different. And even the VC ecosystem also adds pressure to that. And what I've seen in the last maybe 2-3 years is that the usual tenure of a VP of sales is just shortening. And I hate that. And so I want to figure out how to help founders, how to help sales leaders navigate that. And a good way to do that is to create a little bit of a drama around the title, and maybe people will pay attention to it.
Well, the point you make at the start is you talk about drama. I mean, gosh, we're talking about people's lives here, though, right? I mean,
Yes.
We're talking about people, with families to consider, their livelihood to consider, their careers to consider, making a bet, a change, a decision to go join a startup and lasting less than a year. I mean, that's kind of crazy that happens.
It is crazy. It's not only crazy. I wish it was the exception, but it is the norm right now. When it happened to me, I started thinking, first, you go into this sort of post-mortem mode, like, what did I do wrong, right? Like, where did I fail? What could I have done differently? Then I started talking to other people, right? Both, obviously I was looking for a job. So I started networking, talking to my network, talking to my friends, my colleagues, former colleagues, a lot of headhunters, a lot of recruiters, multiple talent agencies. And then I start seeing like, hey, this has happened time and time again. Like, I'm not the only one. Like, I talked to, 3 different CROs in a week, and they all told me essentially, hey, this just happened to me in the last 2 years. And now I'm happy. But this happened, and this is how I avoid it from happening again. And then I realized, okay, so I started taking some notes from those conversations. And then over time, that became sort of like an idea of like, hey, how can I help others? And then Ross reached out and say, hey, I like what you've written. I would like you to contribute. And then I told him, hey, I have this idea of, sort of figuring out how to help founders choose the right VP of sales. So I'm not saying it's not anyone's particular fault like this happens. It's a series of things that creates the revolving door of sales leaders. One, lack of knowing how to hire a VP of sales. 2, timing. That's one of the things I said in my article. Timing is very, very important. And 3, a misalignment on expectations. Many sales even salespeople right now, but most especially founders, they expect a sales leader to generate demand for a product, and like that's something that I want to reiterate. That's the first thing I will say. Salespeople do not generate demand for a product; they convert demand into revenue, and that's what I want to drill into everyone's minds. And if I can do that, then I think I've given my contribution to the world in the small world of cyber.
Well, you do talk about timing. And if I'm going to read from the article, you say
Yes.
if you are a pre-revenue or an early stage cyber company that is still testing out the water, so to speak, you don't need a salesperson and you definitely don't need a VP of sales.
Yes.
So is that happening a lot where founders are going way too early to hire some sort of sales leader?
Pre-revenue, 100%. Like, forget about it. Even a sales leader, a seller, right? If you've invoiced zero, right? If you've sold nothing of your product to the market, how can you expect somebody else to do that for you? Right? Realistically, right? And I've had this conversation multiple times with founders. Even when I was looking for a role, and even the last 2 or 3 months, I've had founders telling me, "Hey, can you come help us out in some way? Can you come in as a fractional sales leader? Great. What's your run rate right now?" And they tell me zero. Like, how can I do something for you as a founder if you haven't been able to do it yourself? And it's one, and the one thing I tell them, the first thing I tell them is, you as a founder will have a much higher win rate than me as a salesperson. Even if I were, the best salesperson in the world, right? Even if I had, an award for the best seller, your conversion rate as a founder is always going to be at least double, if not more than
Why
mine.
is that then?
It's a matter of credibility, right? Like, the founder has skin in the game. He's usually, or he or she is usually the builder of the product. Sometimes they're also practitioners or former practitioners. So they have much more credibility in front of the buyer than somebody who has sales in their title. And the buyers know that the seller's incentives are aligned with getting you to say yes to buying the product, versus the founder might also have those same incentives, but there's a credibility thing, and so if you've never sold, don't bring in a seller. Bring, if you need help, if you need advice, if you need consulting, for sure you can get someone like you or like me. You can read stuff. There's books, there's videos, there's so many things you can do. But go and sell on your own. Get the company to at least 1 million ARR, more likely 5, maybe even 10 million, before you start really, really considering to bring in a sales leader.
I think the other thing that I see on top of that, IL, is the founders' rules for selling,
Yeah,
right? Um, what they say and do and offer and act in front of a prospect is not something they'll usually let salespeople say and do and act. They don't create products not allowing salespeople to create products on the fly. They usually don't
100%.
allow salespeople to make up pricing as they do things. They don't allow founders, salespeople to change the roadmap on the fly, things like that. And quite rightly, when you're in that mode, that's what you should be able to do. But that's something that the founder has I guess, the internal capability to do. But also, I think also to your point, a lot of former practitioners, they can know how to adapt for the situation that the person they're talking to know how to change it up quickly on the fly. Whereas if you're a salesperson and you're maybe a little bit more junior, you probably just don't have the wherewithal to do that.
You don't, and even if you did, right? And I had a lot of room to negotiate in my last in my last gig, right? I had ownership over almost every, like, pricing, customer success. I would say everything except the roadmap. So even if I had all that leeway to make decisions in front of the customer, the founder has that complete perspective on where the company is at, how much resources they need to build to continue building the product. Say if if there's something that they want to develop down the road, or something the investors or a potential investor has told them, hey, you should go in this direction. And so if, for example, if they're trying to win over an enterprise customer as their first reference, right? My job is to sell in a sort of sustainable and more likely profitable way. Whereas the founder might be able to say, "Hey, I'll do this one for free just to get the reference," right? And those things are something that the founder needs to do at least until I want to say 5 million, right? But there's no perfect milestone to that, right? But like there's no threshold where you should say this is a point where you hire someone, but around that number, right?
Now,
Definitely.
I bet the pushback you would get from founders, and you kind of alluded to this in your article. One is, like, I'm just not a salesperson. I can do my best, but my goodness, imagine how good we could be if we had someone who knew what they're doing, running sales or doing sales. That's one thing, right? Second thing that you probably hear is, but my VC's kind of forcing me. My VC's the one, the board, the whatever say, you got to go hire someone, right? You got to go get it
Yes.
done. And the other thing is that they they just don't have the time, right? I mean, if you look at the founder's job, there's so many different hats they have to wear, especially seed A kind of stage, right? They just don't have they probably know it's super important that sales needs to be done, but they also know they've got 45 other things that are climbing for time, and they're thinking,
But
wouldn't it be
the,
good if I
the
just had someone to just take all this off my plate, right?
No, yeah, Look, let's break those three into parts, right? Like one, right? If they think that they can't do it or they're not good enough as a seller, right? I disagree with that. Everyone's in sales, right? Like, whether you're trying to convince somebody to buy a product, or you're persuading somebody to give you information, to sell is human. That's what one of my favorite authors, Dan Pink, says. So the fact that, maybe they're not the person that can build the sales system, but sell, like, talk to customers, try to understand their problem and see if the product that you're building fits their challenge. That's a skill that they need to master, whether they're pre-revenue or about to go IPO. That's a skill every leader needs, not just a founder. Whether you're a CEO or a head of product, like that it's a soft skill that's gonna be useful all the time. So even if they think I'm not the best one, they need to master that skill. So I do disagree with that. The second component, the VCs pushing them. Obviously, I'm biased here, um, because I've seen good VCs chase their portfolio companies down the path of hire as fast as you can, scale, and keep adding bodies until blitz scaling, right? Exactly, right. There's a the faster that you spend it, the more that you need to raise, right? The more that you need to raise, the chunk, the smaller the chunk that you keep, right? So they need to understand that. I hope founders have found by now that raising money can be a double-edged sword. And obviously I can't put myself in their shoes, but they need to figure out how to push back and manage the expectations of their VCs. I'm not saying the VCs are wrong, right? Sometimes hiring a sales leader is as important, because it allows the CEO to sort of or the founder to step away and navigate the other things that he or she needs to do. But at the same time, and I heard this from, I think it was Safil Suri, the head of Bravado, who's a sort of a talent agency for salespeople. He was at a VC conference, and one of the VCs was joking, like plainly on stage, saying something like, your best salesperson is going to be your best sales leader is going to be your third one, because like the VCs know that you're going to make mistakes. So they want you to make that mistake as fast as possible, twice, so that you get the third one right. Which for me as a VP of sales, it sucks because it means like, hey, I'm going to be like the bait to get the second or the third one in to make it right. So So we could dive on that conversation a little bit more, and and expand. And there's a lot of let's say emotions around that I disagree with. At least the fundamental idea that, hey, you're gonna have to hire somebody to fire them, like that
Right.
that
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 just
seems
doesn't
like
go with me.
a I don't know. It seems like a very cavalier way to think about it in my mind.
You're playing with people's lives, and that I don't like that. And I hope that most founders would disagree with that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, founders don't go into thinking, no, this I'm probably going to hire wrong. Let's just hire someone and get through them quickly. Right. They really are trying to
Yes.
get the best people they can. In your article, you go on, you kind of break it out, stage one, which is the pre-revenue
Yeah.
stage, getting the first design partners, things like that. And then you get to stage two, which you call early validation or the dangerous middle, right? This is that 1 million to 5 million ARR, 10 to 40 customer range.
That's the
And
hardest part. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And you say, look, you'll be tempted to hire a VP of sales. Your investors will probably push you to fight those urges, stay strong.
Yes.
What you should do
Yeah.
instead is hire sellers, not a sales leader.
Correct.
So that's the interesting take. So why do you say that?
So one of the last things you said in the previous question was that the third reason a seller might not, or a founder might not hire, or might want to hire, is they don't have time. This is a good segue into that conversation. So it's exactly okay. You found a few customers. You're at that 1 to 5 million range, but you're still not sure if you have product market fit, right? And like I said, a VP of sales is going to come in and try to build a repeatable motion to scale that go to market plan and figure out how to attract more of the same customers that you've already sold to. If you aren't sure that those are the right customers, and you need to be like absolutely hands down super convinced that that those are the right customers, then a VP of sales is an overkill at this time. I'm not saying it's wrong. It's not as wrong as like at the pre-revenue stage. You can still do it, but you can wait a little bit longer, and you can delay that decision, and that's going to be better. And I say fight those urges because it's going to be better. And then at the same time, if you are already at that 1 to 5 million range, and so your calendar is all booked, one of the things I said is, like, I use the same rule. If I would use the same rule for the founder. If your calendar is full of like discovery meetings, and you don't have enough time to follow up with those meetings, great. That's when, like, if I had an aide right now and I see his or her calendar all booked, great. It's time to hire a new one, right? So it's the same thing. If you're a founder, hire a founder AE. Set the right expectations for them. Don't sell them the job like, hey, you're gonna come in as a founder AE and you're gonna build a team. That they might, right? They might grow to be that sales manager, but and that's a separate conversation. But the same skills that make a great founder AE probably play against him or her to be a great sales manager. It's a completely different mindset, and even profile. So my suggestion was, bring in one, maybe bring in two sellers, hand them over the accounts that you have right now, hand them over the customers from a relationship management perspective, right? Like, you don't need the founder involved in a negotiation with procurement more than just like the big red lines, right? Like the back and forth. Um, you don't need them documenting how the POC went, right? Like, you can have the AE, or if you already have a pre-sales person doing that, great. So, and then once you have existing paying customers, you can have this AE go and meet with them and try to understand what made them sort of buy the product, and go and see if they would, be a reference. Go and see if they can bring you into another customer. And so use that additional pair of sellers hands to go and do some of the day-to-day stuff that you're currently doing, while you focus on that higher level sales strategy, or higher level figuring out if you have product market fit. Because you don't suddenly wake up and say, great, my product has achieved product market fit, right? It's not something that you suddenly, like, it's not a switch, right? It's like a knob that suddenly something clicks, right? From my view, and I don't think there's any consensus, but from my view, you can say that you've sort of achieved product market fit when the customers start talking about you without you asking them, right? When you start to see them posting about you on Reddit, and not asking them also means, hey, they're not design partners that you convince them in any way, right? Like you didn't give them a super special discount. You didn't give away the product. They paid fair and square for the product, and now they're raving about it. Great. That means that is your buyer, and you need to find people like that that will, that's when you can say, great, I found my right ICP. I found my right buyer persona. Let's test that, right? And then so you have that new seller that you brought in to try to find 2, 3, 5 more like that. And if they find them, great, then you're ready for that VP of sales, because then you have a potential way to scale.
Yeah, this is such a messy part of the process, right?
Yeah.
Because to your point, it's not like you're sitting there staring at your Salesforce dashboard and something turns green and you go, yay, we got product market fit, right? It's just not the way it works. And there's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 forward, 8 back. You're in that kind of weird world. And this is kind of one area that I kind of looked at your article, and I kind of looked a little bit with an eyebrow raised, just from a sense of what I've seen out there in the marketplace. I think that because I've heard both sides of this before, right? That get the person in early or don't get the person in early, all this sort of stuff, right? Depending on what angle you're coming from. I think the thing that sometimes people don't think about is the idea that a very aware head of sales at an early stage company understands that their job is not to, build the systems and scale the team quite yet. Right. I remember I talked to Cullen Jones when he was the first CRO at Wiz, and he talked about how in the early stage it was all about listening. Right. Because when he joined, just to put it in perspective, he joined Wiz. They had one BDR on board, Ryan Buchanan, who'd been there selling with the CEO, with Asaf, right? Which is what you're talking about, right? He was lighting up the meetings and then teeing them up for Asaf. And then they just hired one AE, I don't know, literally like 2 or 3 weeks before I think Colin joined. And Colin came in as, I don't know if his official title was CRO, but it was VP, it was the head of sales, right? It was not a rep trying to be a sales leader. It was like, you're going to be our head of sales, right? And he said he spent the first, months listening. It's all about listening, listen first approach, and then feedback to the company. And I think this is an interesting kind of angle to this, is when in that messy middle, in that messy process, if you do approach it as a red-blooded salesperson, I'm here to get revenue and customers and logos, and I've got my comp plan and that's my job. That's not what's needed. Whether you call them the VP of sales, you're hiring an AE, you want someone who has that listen first approach, who understands that I think that half their job is listening and adapting and feeding things back, and half their job is then to get customers. And then the question is, to my angle is, who's the best person to do that? Right? Who has the wherewithal, the experience, the gravitas to have those conversations? Is it the up and coming AE, or is it the up and coming sales leader who maybe has a couple of stints under his belt somewhere else and then is really good at navigating those conversations, but who understands I'm not there to build Salesforce and Medic and all this stuff on day one. I'm here to actually get the motions going. So I don't know, that was one area I was kind of scratching my head a little bit, thinking, how does that apply?
No. It is definitely not the junior AE, right? The founder AE. It's not that one. You need that person for tactical purposes. That's it, right? Like the strategic thinking of understanding how you're gonna go to market and what pain your product is actually solving. And where in the journey of building that go-to-market motion you are, that's going to come from a tenured VP of sales that has done it before. I do kind of hate the Wiz example, man.
No, dude. Let me give you some more.
One,
look, I'm with you on that. Right? I hate the people that say, well, Wiz did this, so we should do this, right? So let me give you some more. So Chris Degnan, he was the first, he was actually the first sales hire at Snowflake. Right. He wasn't a rep coming in. Before that, he was the VP of the West at Identity Company. He came in as literally the first person in sales at Snowflake, right? And 10 years later, you know, he eventually retired. And then you look at Eric Apple. Eric Apple was the first sales hire at Island. And he went in as the head of sales, right? And he built his team out from there. And before that, he was a second line manager at Symantec, a VP title Symantec and Cyber Reason as well. Mike Baker, he grew his career at McAfee. He left McAfee as the global vice president of commercial sales at McAfee. He
I
went to
remember that.
Cylance as the head of the West VP, and then he joined Armis as the first person in sales, right? Again, not as a rep, as the person to lead the sales
Yeah.
team. He was the number 2 person ever hired in North America. So it's him and like some sort of ops person who was in North America. And he grew Armis to a lot, and then he went to No Name and then to AIM. And then, you go on like Dan Perelskin, he grew his career at McAfee and Tanium. And then he was the first go-to-market hire as the leader at Access Security. And then Access got bought by HP. So I look at these, I'm very cautious about saying, look, here's a couple of examples, therefore, it's possible. I think, each of these companies, they broke out for lots of reasons, not necessarily because they hired a sales VP, right? But I think it just kind of points that you can be very careful, I think, as a founder about what you're hiring. Because, you might think, well, I'm going to get an AE, and then you might not have the experience to know, is that the right AE or whatever? Or everyone tells me not to hire a VP because they tell me they just want to build process. That's not necessarily the case.
No, I wrote that. Like any person can write a sales process, man. I mean,
I saw that. You're dead right.
Right? It's not a genius that like, come on, like it's a process. You sit down and you say, this is how I think it should be, and that's it, right? And you put in a piece of paper, and then define the basic methodology around it, and that's it. No. To your point, it's I think of, I mean, maybe because I'm by background I'm an engineer, right? So I think of frameworks to do things, right? And so this same article I was trying to come up with, hey, is there a framework for hiring the right person at the right time, right? And that's how I try to approach it. But it's not perfect. There are exceptions to the rule. The voice example does set me apart. Sorry, man. It's just you have cyber stars behind you, and again. But using that as an example, right? You had a savvy CEO with an SDR, so a junior AE, not an AE, but somebody getting meetings and then putting a very good CEO in front of customers so that you could get sales. And then as he was doing that, you brought in a VP of sales to listening to what he was saying and what the customers were doing. But Asaf never abdicated, right? I've seen him still in sales meet. Like the first I saw a presentation he did at a Microsoft event on they closed like a 7-figure deal over the Azure marketplace, right? And everyone was like, how can you close a deal over the marketplace? And then he gave a presentation around that. And then, maybe like the initial lead, right? The inquiry came through the Azure marketplace, but it was still a SaaS pitching, right? So to me, that's the best example of a CEO that's still selling. Doesn't matter. Like this was obviously pre Google, pre the first Google attempt at acquiring them. So they're still, I don't want to say up and coming. They were big enough already, but he was still selling, right? My point to, hey, if you get pressure from above, and you don't have time, but you're still not sure about the VP of sales, bring in a junior seller, right? One, um, it's if you make a mistake with that hire, right? It's not the end of the world, and by a mistake, it means it's going to be very hard for you to find out if that person is good or not until you have that person working with you, right? Um, if that person is not the right fit, they might still have room in the organization because they spend time learning from you as a founder how to pitch, right? So they might still, hey, you bring an AE and that person is it's not the best one, but then if you bring another one, there might be room for improvement between two of them, or maybe you end up replacing that person there. It depends on the scenario, right? But you still have that, how do I say, that context of, hey, if you're busy and you're getting pressure, don't just go on, hey, I'm going to hire a VP of sales
Yeah.
and
No,
person,
it's a
right?
great point you said about don't. I think also hiring someone like that doesn't mean advocating the responsibility for it. When I first early on in my career, I was at a company and it was a decent sized company and the head of one of the divisions. I ended up spending a bit of time with him. And I remember he told me one day, I can't remember the context why he told me this, but he told me one day, he goes, Andrew, the thing to remember about technology is there's two types of people that matter. Those that those that produce products and those that produce orders. He said, everyone else is overhead. I was like,
Well,
okay,
everybody
right.
going,
And
yeah, well,
I think if you kind of embrace the idea, you as a founder can devolve yourself from both those areas. So you just don't
yes,
know what's going on, trust someone, everything's going to be fine because it's not right. It's not the
no,
way things are. So you have to
no, no,
you have
no.
to be closely aligned to those things.
That was also one of the reasons that the article sort of started coming together. With like a lot of feedback that I had from Ross was that he found a lot of founders as well, that hey, they're builders, right? They want to spend their time coding, they want to spend their time getting the product, shipping the product, and so they bring in the VP of sales to hand over the reins of the sales motion. That's what I mean by abdicate, right? Like, you can't do that. You can't, right? And so that's I would say like the biggest pitfall of I told you in the beginning, right? Like, and the one thing I want people to remember is sales, doesn't generate demand. The second one is like you can't hand over the reins, and for whatever reason, right? Whether it's because you want to focus more on building, or you don't think you're the right person. Nobody's born learning how to be a CEO, right? Like, you grow into the role and you learn. It's the same thing with the sales skills, right? So I think bringing in a VP of sales, if as long as you have the expectation and they have the idea that, hey, they're going to come in and listen, and for at least the first 6 months their job is to understand before starting to build, then great. The how many VCs right now give a VP of sales 6 months just to listen, right? Like, Cyberstars understands that they had a great thing, that Asaf was putting together. So anyway, right? Like, there's not that many out there that give you that wrong way, right?
I think one of the things that you also said in the article, I think it was implied as opposed to saying it, but um, don't hire one person if you can. Hire 3 or 4 or 5, right? Because then you get the understanding. Well, is it the person that isn't
Yeah,
working out? Is it the process? Is it a product? Is it what is it? Right? If you hire one person and hope it works, then you just don't know what the failing point is.
yeah. That's I mean, that's just a common sort of a hiring practice, right? Like, try to figure out where's the breakdown in the issue, right? And especially if you're a first time founder and you've never sort of hired other leaders, right? Like, you're gonna make mistakes.
Yeah. A good way. It's interesting. As I was reading your article, I know a story from my past. So I spent a bit of time at Tanium. I don't know if many people know this kind of real kind of founding part of this. I'm not giving away anything that's not public already, I don't think. But Orion, who was the son, David was the dad, right? They were the founding kind of family of Tanium. The first person they actually hired to help with go to market stuff was a guy by the name of Todd Bryden, and Todd's job was to he talked about it was to tee up meetings for Orion, right? He was a super he was super experienced. He wasn't like a junior SDR and all that, but
Yeah,
he was one of these guys just rabbit, right? You give him focus on something, he just delivers, right? And that's what his job was to do that. But the really interesting thing about the Titanium progress was they wanted to get more validation of the product. They wanted to get customers. How do we speed this up? They actually did a deal with McAfee, and McAfee OEM'd the Tanium product in the super early days, right? This is probably 2012, 2013, something like that. And Tanium actually didn't take much revenue. They gave most of it to McAfee, but they just wanted to. They suddenly had like 300 people
yeah,
selling Tanium, right? And they would just tee up meetings all day long for Orion. Orion was just like again and again and again. They
Yeah,
got
yeah.
a whole bunch of customers. And then what they did when they were ready to hire their first proper sales team at Tanium, they hired the top 3 sales leaders in the Americas out of McAfee. They
Of
hired
course, yeah.
Carpenter, the head of Americas. Brian Gumbel was the VP of the East in Canada, and Ty Fag was the VP of the West. They just took them right into Tanium, and obviously McAfee wasn't happy that they just stole that whole layer of management, but that's what gave them the foundation, right? And it was really
Or
interesting to see, okay, how do we get customers? How do we de-risk the process? And then through the process of the McAfee deal, Ryan would have got to know Carpenter and Gumbel and Ty, right? And know really well. So, okay, that's my team, right? I trust
no, no,
them. I
no.
know them. I know what they're doing. Kind of
Not
interesting,
only
different way
that,
to
right?
approach it, right?
He worked with them side by side, winning and probably losing deals. So he got to see them, like, through thick and thin. More importantly, right, like just as trying to sort of study it as a, let's say, a case study. They didn't go and build an outbound or inbound or PLG motion, right? Like they did an ecosystem play to get product market fit. Like, I think that's a wonderful, and that's why Tanium is like that, right? I think it's I think there's going to be more opportunities for founders to go and build products in that manner, and I think it's going to be moving forward harder to go and build go to market motions the traditional way of, like, the outbound, from my perspective, is extremely challenging, if not a dead motion right now, for like the typical SDR approach. It's just too expensive. So I think that the idea of bringing in someone to do like a technology alliance or an ecosystem play first as the starting point, I think has a lot of merit, and I would try to advise founders to go in that direction first before trying anything else. I think it's a great idea.
And especially these days, Al, right? You know how more difficult now it is to get attention and pipeline and meetings than it was 10, 15 years ago. If you've got a way to tap into that, then that's going to be huge. Let me ask you one more thing that you talked about.
Yeah.
So you moved on to stage 3, scaling systems and hiring your first sales leader. You gave 3 criteria for that leader. And it's interesting that only one of them was their ability to build and scale the go-to-market motion, right? You said the first thing was leadership. The second thing was a trustworthy person you really like. And the third thing was their ability to build and scale the go-to-market motion. Tell us more about why you could have come to that conclusion.
I had 10 more things. I kid you not. I had an entire 3 or 4 additional pages that I thought about, because of, I came up with these things based on, the people I've worked for, and the people I've seen, and people I've admired over the past years, that I think, man, this is such a great leader, right? And so I tried to distill what made them great, and then I put them into paper, and then I ended up with, like, really, like, 4 or 5 pages longer. And then, I said, okay, this is already way too long. We can't add, like, we can't add that. Okay, if I can narrow it down, right? What would that be? And yeah, obviously the building the go to market motion, that's like the table stakes. But also, one of the things, like, that I said is, like, you gotta like this person. You're gonna become, if things work right, you as the founder are gonna become extremely close with your VP of sales. You're gonna be talking with him or her all the time. You sort of gotta be friends, right? Not just colleagues, not just, oh, he reports to you and your business acquaintances. You gotta feel like you can work with this person all the time, and call them at any time, and they can call you at any time. And if it's a Sunday, you can chat over WhatsApp, and they don't feel bad, you don't feel bad about it. So I that's what I tried to say when when I said you have to trust them and they have to trust you, because it's a relationship that has to work. If that relationship doesn't work, that's it, right? And I'm going back to, there's a post from Sam Jacobs, CEO of Pavilion, where he was talking about a friend of his or somebody he knows where he was the sales leader and he had a very good relationship with his own CEO, but something shifted. I think he made a mistake. I don't remember what it was, but the CEO suddenly um, uh, the relationship shifted a little bit, right? Like the CEO stopped looking at him a second less, right, during meetings, or he was a little bit colder, and then Sam said to this, his advice was leave, right? Like you're not going to be able to fix that relationship. And the guy did the opposite, right? Like he worked his ass off to make sure that he earned that trust, and that didn't happen, right? Like once trust is broken between the CEO and the leader, it's better for both if you exit, right? And that happened. This happened to me a while back, right? I tried all my best to earn back my CEO's trust, and I couldn't, and ultimately I parted ways, and it was better for me in the long run. And so I looked back at that, and I thought, okay, that's when I had trust, and then I lost it, right? What if you never have that? What if you hire somebody but you don't really trust him or her? That's just not going to work, right? So that's what I said. This is somebody you have to trust. This is somebody he or she is going to be your buddy for a long time. I think that's, I would say, the most underrated thing that I could add.
And that to me is one of the biggest differences between being in a medium to large company and being in a small company is that tightly integrated leadership team
Yes,
happens, it's needed at the smaller company. And you all have to know that this is going to be messy as hell, right?
it is.
I'm going to forecast things that, are much less likely to happen than if I was at a big company with, 500 reps and a lot of coverage and padding and things like that. It's a lot more transparent at the smaller company. It's a lot more volatile. Things are going to go wrong and right and inside and outside all day long. And we need to trust each other that, hey, we get it and we support each other, right? It's such
Yes.
an interesting relationship to have.
Right, and that's the one thing that I think Ross and I see things the same way. Like we're building products that are basically used to increase trust in society, right? You gotta start with customers trusting you, and from my view, you have to start with you trusting your sales leader, and you as a sales leader trusting your founder. If you don't have that, it's just not going to work out.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. One of my clients, they had a good outcome in the end, but I know that the head of sales wouldn't work with those founders again, right? Because of how certain things were handled, how I don't know, I can go a lot of detail, but it's just clearly the process ended up with them the experience that said, that's not someone I'd trust to make the right decisions, handle themselves appropriately, be the adult in the room when
Yep.
things are good or bad. And it's not until sometimes you get into the nitty gritty that you actually learn what each other's like.
Yep.
Well,
And then,
Eyal, listen, that was a interesting conversation for me, hopefully for you too, and hopefully for our
definitely.
audience. This is such an interesting area because I think to your point, it's so messy. You try and, what I really liked about your article is you're trying to make sense of something that's actually very messy. And, I give you a few outliers and things like that. And we kind of recognize that, there's no one way to do it, but there's certainly
There's no
some
one
much
way
better
to
ways
that.
to do it than others, right?
Hopefully, there's there's fewer people in the sort of revolving door of sales leader because of this conversation, right? That's what I hope happens.
Well, I hope so too. If someone wants to get in touch with you and talk more, what's the best way to do that?
LinkedIn, man. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to chat. I always tell founders my advice is for free. I've made so many mistakes that I want them to avoid those mistakes from repeating. So yeah, they can reach me out.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.